Here's two guys that will lead the roving hordes, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 50 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In today's show, we help you prepare for 2012. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan,
and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today's show is sponsored by Cat's Coffee. If you're looking for truly exceptional coffee to help you survive the morning or the next zombie apocalypse, you need to be drinking Cat's. They specialize in the finest coffee from sources that prioritize environmental responsibility and are fair trade certified. Their goal is to achieve perfection in every cup. Check them out at Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com, or click on their bright green banner on the site and make sure you're dealing with an official sponsor of the show. Again, that's Cat's, K-A-T-Z as in zebra, coffee.com. A couple of quick announcements today. Next week, we are going to launch the 1-year anniversary show, which will explain why I'm now covered in rabbit urine at this exact moment in time. And we're going to have Jeep, the moderator of the forum, come on and kind of tell us about his journey through the last year. And Jason McConnell, the Redneck Resource, will finally be back, and we're going to give everybody an update on what's been going on the farm, but more importantly, what we've learned from a year of urban farming. And it's probably not going to be what you would expect.
Or it's exactly what you'd expect. One or the other.
One or the other, perhaps. I'd also like to give a special shout out to a longtime listener, as a matter of fact, that I got the chance to speak to on the phone the other day for about 30 or 45 minutes, and he is being redeployed overseas. He's off serving our country, and I just want to say thank you. Keep yourself safe and sound, and come back home to that rugby team you've got in one piece. And one more special shout out to our friend Scout from Project Appleseed, who I'm not really sure I understand the full details of exactly how it happened, but Scout managed to get himself a little banged up the other day, and we sincerely hope that he gets well soon and gets back out on his ranch and hasn't done too much permanent damage to himself.
Speedy recovery, Scout.
And with that, we're going to jump into the show today, which is kind of a little bit of a wrap-up for the year, and we want to go back to the simple steps for preparing and the basic things that need to be focused on. And in some parts, we're going to talk about it from the standpoint of somebody that's new, and in other parts, we're going to talk about it from a standpoint for people that have been doing it for a while. And while it may seem like a repeat of things we have, which is what it is, what we're really trying to do here is sometimes it's just good to be reminded of things and maybe mull old information over again. You might see it in a new way. And, of course, for people that are new to survival or new to the show, kind of maybe pick up some new pointers here and there.
Yeah, I like to think of it as a new year, new beginning. And so it's kind of time to start and take a look at things. And even if you know what you're doing, this is a great way to kind of go through it again and go mental checklist. Then I do A, B, C, D, and E. And it's, go through it. It's kind of like spring cleaning. We do it every single year, but we still do it.
Exactly. And, we talked about it a little bit in the last episode. We mentioned that there was an article that I had written for Neil Strauss's blog. And one of the comments I got back was, well, that the essence of the article was basically why not to freak out about 2012 and why you should prepare rationally, which is the main focus of our show. And his response back was, well, that's all well and good, but I'm just going to wait until I hear the alerts and stuff to store food or do anything like that. And that brings me to the point of preparation is not something that should be put off until danger is there. Because what happens when you try to prepare in the moment that you know danger is coming? You react rather than responding to the situation. Reacting, as we were joking about last time, is rushing out a couple hours before the hurricane's coming and just grabbing all the bottled water you can, or in some cases finding out that you were too late and there is nothing left to get, as opposed to responding to the potential of a dangerous situation and storing in advance. And the beautiful thing that we've talked about, all of this stuff, no matter what we're talking about storing, whether we're talking about water, food, or medical supplies, or consumables, these things, you will use them in your life, unless you are a week away from the end of your life, in which case, I'm very sorry, just sad to see you go. But for the rest of us, you will use all of this stuff at some point in your life. And we've never advocated that you should go out, unless it's within your financial means and it's something you want to do, to, for example, go out and buy a $7,000 pallet of Mountain House freeze-dried food that'll get you and, what is it, I think one more person through 3 years. That's certainly, it's okay if you can afford it, but for the rest of us that can't, it's unnecessary. And that is an example of something where you may not use it, but the point is that it's unnecessary. Start off preparing now. Let it be a journey rather than a destination.
Going back to your reaction statement, when you react, you're not in control. It's the situation that controls your actions. And that's why being proactive like this allows you to take control and not have to be a little bit, I think the people who react tend to run around like chickens without heads, or like Aaron's chickens, even when they have heads. But when you actually are proactive and you go out and do these things, like Aaron said, we're not telling you go and buy $7,000 pallet of freeze-dried food. I mean, if you can, great, or if you want to, great. Even if I could, I'm not sure that's the way I would do it. I would probably still do food stores the way that I do today and Aaron does today, just because I like the idea of using what I take in, and it gives me a little bit of a, I don't know, that grocery store in your own house kind of feeling. I don't know why that makes me happy these days, but it does.
Well, I think in a practical sense, it's very much a time saver. What I used to always hate before I really started prepping was you'd come to the end of the week and it was always that aggravation because maybe something ran out a day sooner than you thought, and it was, crap, I don't have eggs for breakfast, or I don't have sugar for my coffee, or I don't have coffee to put the sugar in, whatever it is. Just in the simple things, it's so nice. I mean, we've got a big shelf in my kitchen, and for those people who are like, oh my God, you've got a giant shelf in your kitchen. We have my girlfriend and I have a very old home. It's a 1930s bungalow that has no pantry. So, we just blame it on, we have no pantry. So everything people would normally keep in their cabinets and stuff, we just keep it on one big shelf. And that's kind of how we explain it away.
Plus, I'd have to sneak into the back of your house, look through windows, and even see it. It's not like it's visible to the whole world where you have a giant sign outside that says, hey, come check out my food stores.
I do, but it's only my way of luring.
That's totally different. Of
luring walking refrigerators to my home. But no, that's I am completely kidding about that. Cannibalism doesn't appeal to me.
I totally agree with you. I think the whole idea of, the convenience, we talk a lot about it's living better day to day.
Mm-hmm.
I will tell you, I recently had this moment where, when the cereal box has just a little bit of cereal left in it, but it's not enough for a bowl. But the day before you thought this has got to be enough cereal for another bowl. I was at that moment yesterday. But you know what? I was able to go right into the pantry, get the next box, and start it up. And while that's not necessarily prep and survival, it's definitely living better day to day, because otherwise I would have been really annoyed.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we've talked about in the past, the other thing that it allows you to do is take advantage of opportunity buys. And by that, you can use coupons, you can shop things that are on sale and discounts. Grocery stores are constantly discounting certain items, and then it's another month or so before they run that special. And so if you have a backlog and if you're paying attention to the prices, I think that's probably an important distinction there.
Oh yeah.
Then you're able to actually look and say, oh wow, okay, this is on sale. I know that I have about this much, or I've already got enough, but you know what, it's on sale, I'll get more, and I'll just be that much further ahead for whatever it is. It could be salsa, it could be sugar, it could be flour, it could be eggs, it could be anything. It doesn't matter. It's any of the food items that you use on a regular basis. And again, it's food. You're going to use it at some point. Now, obviously, going out and buying 3 months worth of milk might not work out very well because that is a perishable item. But, you know, maybe powdered milk is okay. And if you use powdered milk,
I got a lot of milk to throw away.
I told you, man. You got to check those expiration dates.
I know.
And I think that's another funny thing. And I think without going into it too much today, expiration dates are kind of funny. Expiration dates on milk are usually pretty accurate, but most other food items, as long as you keep them sealed, as long as you keep them out of direct sunlight, they'll last a really long time. Most of them last much longer than the expiration dates that are actually on the packaging. And I think my girlfriend Jennifer and I go round and round about that all the time because I'll pick something up and she's like, oh my God, it's expired. And I look and go, it's cereal. How does it expire? And I mean, I'm teasing her a little bit, but to make a point, which that actually was a conversation one day. But the point is that the expiration date's on there as long as you keep it sealed and as long as you keep it out of direct sunlight and as long as you're not constantly opening and closing or whatever it is, most of those things will last well past whatever expiration date it is that they've put on it. That the expiration date, by and large, is a covering of the ass for the manufacturers.
And if you look, often it's a sell-by date. It's not even an expiration date anymore. It's really a date that the store should have moved it, not so much a date that you have to have eaten it by.
And while we were joking about milk a minute ago, I have found over the years when I stopped drinking whole milk many years ago and started drinking skim milk, it is amazing how long skim milk actually will last, as long as you keep it in the refrigerator, obviously. And so those are kind of things to look at. You know, maybe some of the things as you get into this, you'll change some of your habits to accommodate how long things last. And hopefully you're also, you know, much like that milk thing, doing things that make your life better now by attributing to better health. To kind of wrap up a little bit with the conversation about food, for people that are new to prep and are wondering how to get started, the easiest thing you can do is it's a term that was phrased by the late great Ron Hood, which is called copy canning. And copy canning is essentially where, let's say you eat Chef Boyardee ravioli on a regular basis, just as an example. And so if you buy 1 can of it a week, copy canning is, instead of buying 1 can, you go to the grocery store, you buy 2 cans. You come home the next week, you know, you do it again. And you keep doing that. You keep until you get to having enough of a store to whatever time frame. We're not really going to talk too much about time frames for storage today. The general rules are, you know, some people are okay with 72 hours of additional food stores beyond what they normally have. Some people like 3 months. Some people like a year. Some people go as far as 3 years. And I think 3 years is almost the limit for most people as far as space and financial concerns come into play. But that is the easiest way to get started. Now, going beyond that, you can start getting into, you know, once you're settled in with the things that you already eat and that you already consume on a regular basis, you can start getting into the long-term storables. Things like the freeze-dried foods from Mountain House or Honeyville Grain, or MREs are another one that are very popular.
And just to bounce back a little bit, Aaron, just like going to the very basic, if you're really just getting started, then we posted a document a long time ago, and we might want to put out another link, and I'll see if I can find it. The one from the Alaska Department of Homeland Security, and it was a way to Now, again, I'm just going to, the whole idea here, and I won't cover too much detail, is in Alaska, there's a good chance that it would take a very long time to get to you in an emergency. So what they've done is they've put together a 10-day, I believe it was a 10-day list, but they gave you a way to do it over the course of a year. So now that we're in a new year, this would be a good time to start doing something like that. And it shows you how over 52 weeks you can put together a 10-day supply of not just food, water, but medical supplies, everything. I mean, it was your full what you need to survive, and doing it over a 52-week period. Now, the 52-week period was the slowest way to do it. You could always accelerate that, but it was a really good way of laying out building an initial store. Everything else we're talking about is kind of what you would do to build on top of that, or if you just wanted to do food stores versus medical versus water. But it was a really good list, and I thought that's a good place for, if any of you are beginners out there listening, going, all right, just listening to the show now, that's a good place to start.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with that, and it was a fantastic find. When you came across it, and we will dig up the link and put it back in the show notes for today's show. And remember, if you're new to the show, we always put any kind of information that we talk about. We try to include as many links to as much stuff from each show as we can. So always check the show notes, and feel free to comment. Comments are always open. But moving on to water. Water is, there's a lot of, how can I put this? And I don't want to say it's a myth, because we've never actually been able to find a scientific study on the topic of storing water on concrete, in plastic containers on concrete, more precisely. I've spent a lot of time, and I've dug around. I've spent more time than I probably should have reasonably spent digging around, actually looking for, where did this theory come from that you should not store water in plastic containers on concrete. The general idea is that by storing water in plastic on concrete, that there is a chemical reaction between the plastic and the concrete that then causes the plastic to leach chemicals out of the concrete into the water that then becomes poisonous. There are as many different variations on this theory as there are survival blogs. One guy was saying, no, it's just dependent on what kind of plastic it is and in what temperature and all this other stuff. Safe to say, I can't find any real hard evidence of this, or even figure out where this got started. But that being said, best practice is to keep any stored water off concrete. Storing it on concrete may or may not harm anything. We can't actually figure it out. If somebody out there has a real scientific study, or a lead on a real scientific study that we can finally put this to rest, please, either email us or post it in the show notes. We'd really appreciate it. It's been driving me nuts for a couple of years now.
It has. He's been talking about it regularly. It's crazy. So if somebody out there has it, please help us all. Help us all.
John just wants me to shut up about the water.
Just about the water. No, but I mean, you're right, though. Better safe than sorry. So if you've got one of those wood pallets around, and you can get those in tons of places, a lot of stores have them, and they'll give them to you for free.
Mm-hmm.
You can just set your water on top of one of those, put the pallet down on the concrete, and put your water on top of there, assuming it scares you. I admit, I've got plastic jugs sitting on concrete, so if you come to my house and that's a fear of yours, don't drink the water.
There's other good ways of storing water, but a lesson I recently learned is, do not store water above the first shelf closest to the floor. Plastic containers can sometimes rupture and get little pinhole leaks for whatever reason, and then leak all over whatever's underneath them. Now, I actually store most of my water in 5-gallon plastic containers that were thoroughly cleaned out first. But I also had a few cases of Ozarka, which is just a brand of bottled water for those that don't have it in their area. And one of the things that Ozarka does is they'll sell packages in their 2.5-gallon bottles that have a little pour spout on them. but the plastic that they use for these containers is crap, and they have a tendency to pinch and create pinholes. And what happened was I stacked a couple of them on top of each other on the bottom of the shelf, and then came home one night and was like, why is there a puddle of water in my kitchen? And one of the bottles had ruptured, or actually it may have even been two of the bottles had ruptured and leaked all over the kitchen floor. And luckily there was nothing underneath them, but a valuable lesson nonetheless. It's also, water tends to be heavy, so you might not want to store it above the first shelf anyway. That way, whether you're male or female, it's easy to move if need be. If you're in a bug out situation and need to gather as much of that water as you can to put in your vehicle to then leave. Beyond that, there are the simplest way to start off with water, and maybe even the simplest way to start off with prep in general, is just buy yourself a case of water. At Sam's, at the grocery store, wherever, just buy yourself a case of bottled water. And in that action alone, you will be better off than I would guess to say. And remember, 90% of statistics are made up on the spot. 95% of the country, you're probably better prepared then. Then you've got that extra water.
This is a great time to do it, by the way, because if you look at the country as a whole, we've had minus the big storm that happened before winter even started, but overall, we've had a really mild winter. You haven't seen a lot of heavy snowfall across the country. If you live in the South, this is a good time to do it because you're preparing for anything that might come in the spring or tornado season or any of that. If you're in the Gulf region, this is a great time to stock up because you're way ahead of hurricane season. If you're in the Northeast, do it now because you never know, the winter could get far worse before it's over. So the idea here is this is a great time to go out and do these things. We've been very lucky this year as far as having a mild winter. We didn't have a bad hurricane season, at least in the Gulf states. I know the East Coast had a bad hurricane season. So if you had one, this is a great time to go, wait a minute, this could happen to me. We're not hearing about a lot of earthquakes or anything like that right now, at least not in the U.S. So this is the time. Go for it. Start now. Be prepared for the next event that might happen because you never know when it'll happen.
Exactly. Like I said before, storing water is one of the easiest things you can do, because how easy it is while you're at the grocery store to just grab an extra case of bottled water and throw it on the bottom of your shopping cart and take it home, stick it on a shelf, and boom, you've got water for, depending on how many people live in your home, you've got water for a little while. Now let's talk about how much water to store. Well, the debates rage on for that too. And the general rule of thumb is 1 gallon per person per day for however long you want to store water for. And
that's just for drinking water, by the way.
That is
just for drinking.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. I'm glad you made it, that a lot of people miss, is that is purely just for drinking. And then add on top of that another half a gallon a day for each pet that you have. If you have a pet turtle, that might be a little excessive, but hey, who knows?
Couldn't hurt.
So I don't know. It could be like one of those giant tortoises or something, and then a half gallon a day is not enough. But that,
exactly.
I digress. But anyway, a gallon a day is a general rule of thumb. If you live in particularly hot climates or particularly arid and hot climates, like let's say you were living in Phoenix, you're probably going to want more than a gallon of water a day per person. And as far as storage of that, you can buy the 1 gallon containers. You can get fancy like I have and buy the the 5, and they also make a 7.5 gallon water containers. I know, Jonathan, you've got a couple of those containers and really like them too.
I love my 7s because to me that's just mentally easy.
Yeah.
Each one of those containers is 1 week of water for one person. And I always do, because we also have 2 small dogs in the house. They also get 1 container for the 2 dogs. 1 container lasts them a week too. And then I always do 1 additional. So I have my wife and myself and then the dogs. So that's 3 containers. I have 6 containers, but I actually have 7. Does that make sense?
Yes. You have 6 for yourself and the
2
wife.
2 weeks of water plus 1 spare.
And The reason we like those so much is, one, the plastic on them is nice and heavy, and it's not going to rupture easily. I've actually never had one of the Reliance containers rupture. What about you, John?
No, I haven't had leaks or ruptures of any kind. I've
Yeah.
had them now for about a year,
Mm-hmm.
and they've had water in them the whole time, and they've actually even had water in them through a move.
Yeah,
So
that was one of
they've
the
done
other
fine.
things I was going to bring up, is that a couple of the containers I have, because I do have a couple of sevens that I use for our camping trips,
Mm-hmm.
and those have lasted being thrown in the back of a truck and uh, going off to go camping, and then survived weekends. And we have a tendency to destroy things on our camping trips.
Yep.
Um,
Mostly with fire, but yeah.
Yeah, it usually involves the campfire somehow, but that's usually either hot dog forks or lawn chairs.
True.
But a story for another day. So, but they're pretty heavy duty. The other nice thing is they actually do have on-off spouts, so you're not having to deal with a cap or anything like that, and they can be rested on something and easily dispensed, whether you're in home or whether you're out and about doing whatever.
The other thing to think about is gray water, and I for some reason I cannot remember the name of the product, but I've got one now, and it fits in your bathtub. Do you remember the name?
Oh yeah, the water bob.
The Water Bob. I've got one of those now. I haven't tested it ever, but I do have one, and the idea is it just goes in your bathtub, and that's great for additional water if you do need additional drinking water, because as long as you fill it before the storm or event that happens, the water should be drinkable. But the idea, I use mine as a gray water kind of concept, where now I can use it to fill the back of toilets if I had to, or to, just kind of give myself a quick little wash down, whatever it might be. And they have a little pump on them, so you can actually get every last bit of water out of it.
So you're not using yours to store gray water. You're using yours to store for gray water use.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Just wanted to make sure.
Better way of putting it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure people weren't storing their gray water and
Yeah,
their water
do
bobs.
not store your gray water in your bathtub. That's a bad idea.
But that is an excellent use for both, and it's another way to very quickly add a lot of water, and they're cheap. They're, what are they, $20-$25?
I ended up getting it on sale for like $14.99.
Oh, there you go.
It looks like the websites run sales regularly. Like, you get them on a few different sites pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm. And we will put a link to both products on in the show notes today. The other thing to remember, as far as the plastics go, and people seem to have become obsessed about what kind of plastic they're storing their water in. Not going to throw out an opinion today. I will tell you that I buy the BPA free. There are both pros and cons about the BPA. If it's something that concerns you, do research, share it with us in the show notes today, in the comments section. Everybody else that has an interest in it would be interested to know your findings. But as far as worrying too much about it, I don't know. I've not cared enough to do a lot of research on the topic.
Yeah, I go with what you just said, which is go with the solution that makes you comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
If you have an aversion to something, don't do it. But as long as you're storing water, you're in a better position than you would have been had you not stored water. So Do what you're comfortable with in order to actually do it.
And going even beyond anything we've talked about so far, you can get. They have 150, and I believe they even have 250-gallon water tanks that you can set up in your garage or in your home to store quite a bit of water. And they have special pressure relief valves on them and all kinds of stuff. You can get pretty crazy with water storage. I mean, you can have a cistern put in. You can do all kinds of stuff. The only problem with the really big water containers, one is the weight involved.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, it's about 10 pounds per gallon of water is roughly, depending on what's in the water. But that's kind of the rough estimate to use. And when you start putting, 250-gallon tanks in places, you have to, what is the foundation that it's sitting on? Do you have a slab home? Do you have a home that's on pier and beam? How much weight can the floors of your home actually, or your garage actually support? So these are things to be mindful of. And the biggest problem with those big containers, which there are usually places locally that sell big water containers that maybe don't have the fancy caps that the ones that I'm referring to that I can't remember the name of, but we'll put in the show notes. The biggest disadvantage or the biggest hassle with them as far as cost, they're not that expensive, but the shipping costs on them are ridiculous. So I think one of the vendors that I even emailed at one point when I was writing a quick Friday gear report about them, is how much are they? And the guy selling them actually responded with, too much, they're not worth it. So I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, the shipping on them is ridiculous. I can't sell them. And we talked a little bit more, and I think it was like $100 or $150. Whatever, the shipping was almost as much as whatever the container was. So, but for people out there that want to do really long-term storage or just really are thirsty, maybe that's an option, but that's kind of where you can go with water.
There's also some water purification systems that we've talked about in the past, but I don't think we need to get into too much detail on those.
Yeah, I think you're better off storing water. There's nothing wrong with a filter. I don't want to be misunderstood in that, and I think water filtration is a great thing. But as far as depending on a water filter in an emergency, I would much rather have the water stored ready to go than worrying about whether the filter I have will filter out whatever the water issue is or not. And in some cases, they actually do just shut off the water to prevent anybody from drinking it or to prevent problems from happening. In those instances, a water filter isn't going to do you any good. But there are some really great water filters. I know Berkey's one that are very popular in the community. I don't have one. I don't, other than a backpacking water filter, I don't really mess with them too much.
Yeah, same here.
So we've talked about food and we've talked about water, and I think the next thing to really go into is your shelter, your home. These are the survival basics that we're kind of going through today. And as far as your home goes, I think for one thing, people kind of look at their homes in a funny way. In a large part, we've taken on this mentality of looking at our houses as a place to lay our heads rather than our home. Traditionally what we thought of a home. And in large part, and what got a lot of people into trouble recently was thinking of them as investments. And I think that's fine if you're good at it and know what you're doing, but it can bite you in the butt. But the point I'm trying to get to here is investing in your home in things like doing something, having a plumber come over, check out your hot water heater, which is another way of, water in emergency, and making sure that you have a backflow valve installed on it, that your water heater is kept in good condition, that it's drained on a somewhat annual or even better biannual basis to get all the sediment out so that you have that emergency water available to you should something happen. Because that right there, in most homes, what do we have? 50 to 80 gallon tanks. So that's 50 to 80 gallons worth of water just sitting around doing nothing. But there's, going beyond that, we look at the security of our homes. Do you have, motion sensitive lights outside? Does your house have the basics to ward off would-be intruders? And this isn't talking about the roving, defending yourself from the roving hordes. That's a whole nother topic altogether that we'll get into one day. I'm actually kidding. We'll probably never really get into that topic. It's not really what our show is about, but as far as making sure that your home's well lit, and I think that was one of the topics we covered with the former Secret Service agent who's been in law enforcement for forever, Dan Blackford, who's a good friend of ours. And that was one of the most basic things, was make sure your home is lit up. Making sure that, don't have glass doors. The simple things of don't make your house an easy target. Make it just enough. We're not saying you have to have burglar bars on the windows, but it's just enough that says this home's not easy. Go to the next house.
Yeah, and this is a great time, again, new year, time to kind of take a look at everything you're doing. This is a good time to go around the house, make sure all the bulbs are fresh, make sure that the batteries in your fire detectors or your fire alarms are okay, your smoke detectors are okay, your carbon monoxide detectors. Go check all that stuff out. This is a great time to also go through all your flashlights and check your batteries, the different kits you have. I know a lot of you have bobs. Check your bob, make sure the batteries in the bob are all good. This is a good time to go, you know what? Fresh year, fresh start, go through, just make sure everything's working. And as far as your shelter goes, check the shelter. Go through and do all the standard checks you would. Make sure that all the lighting is pointing in the right direction. I know I was checking my house recently and noticed that my side lights, over time, with winds and storms and all the different things that happen around a house, they'd shifted and they were actually facing in a direction that didn't help me at all. So it didn't light up the side of my house. It actually lit up the side of my neighbor's house. So I just twisted them over and moved them. Yeah, great for my neighbor, not very helpful for me.
Yeah.
So again, it's just a good time to go through and make sure everything's working the way you want it to. And if you set this as a regular time of year, okay, new year, time to go through everything again. You always know that at least once a year you've done your checks.
And something people forget to check quite often is fire extinguishers. And if you're saying to yourself, well, I don't have any fire extinguishers to check, well, that's another thing you should put on your list for this year is get some fire extinguishers. But fire extinguishers really need to be checked at least once a year. Make sure they're, in the green, ready to go, that they are out and put in places that are easy to get to and use. They're not going to do a lot of good if they're in a cabinet and you can't remember which cabinet, and if they're, out of, that's the thing I hate about fire extinguishers. They're ugly as sin, but if you put them away in a cabinet, they fall out of mind. And then in the event of, let's say you have a kitchen fire or something, it may not be you that's the one dealing with that kitchen fire. It may be, your wife or your children or your husband or whoever that is not the person that put that fire extinguisher there. And in that moment of panic, they may not be able to remember which cabinet the fire extinguisher that's horribly ugly is hidden away in. So I think that's, those are some things to really take into account. And, Jonathan was talking about kits a moment ago. This is a perfect time of the year to sit down, and we did a show on all kinds of different bags that we'll link to. And we even did a whole article on the topic of blackout kits and the things that you should put in them. And a blackout kit, simply put, is a kit that you keep near your bed, or, even you can even keep several of them strategically throughout the house. And they are the basic items that if the lights turned out tomorrow, and we're not talking about permanent lights out, 1 second after kind of scenarios. What we're just talking about is power outage for whatever reason. These are the items that get you through that. If it's, I think we wrote about that. It's not a bad idea to keep a fire extinguisher, a small one, in that bag to help you if you're trapped in a room and need to at least do some minor fire extinguishing. Is that even a phrase or word? But it is now. Some minor fire extinguishing to be able to get out of your house in the event of a fire, or to put out a small electrical fire or something in the middle of the night without having to look for one. You know where it is. Other things to keep in there are flashlights, an emergency radio. There's a whole list, and we'll not really take up time on the show going through it. We'll link to it in the show notes like we talked about. But this is a perfect time of year to sit down, review that list, and think about what are the items that you want to keep in your blackout bag to put next to your bed, put in your teenage children's rooms, anywhere in the home that you feel is a right place to keep that. And not to let it be something that's hidden. Make sure that everyone in the home knows where all of those kits are. Because, again, it may not be you dealing with the situation.
Yeah, it kind of sounds hokey and cliche, or I don't know, but the whole idea of doing those kinds of little drills is not a bad idea. The idea of the little house fire drill, the blackout drill. That way everybody knows what they're supposed to do in those situations. And if you've got children who are old enough to understand how those things work, then it definitely helps, and it solidifies things in their heads. They're going to hate you for it, while it's going on. If a disaster ever happens, they'll love you for it.
Exactly. So moving on to security. And for some people, I think this can be a bit of a touchy subject because it involves guns. I can't imagine that's a large portion of a survival show listening base, but I'm sure they're out there. But that being said, we're going to talk about guns now. And I think we've had Dan Blackford on to talk about guns. We've had Robert from Talon Arms on to talk about all kinds of guns and toys. But what are the basics? What do you start with? Well, I think that's a large part. It's a personal preference, and that was one of the things we were talking about with Robert one of the times when he was on, because Robert likes an AR-15 and has some very valid points for defending his home using an AR-15 or any other kind of semi-automatic rifle. And there's good points and bad points about a handgun and using that to defend your home, and there's points being on. But I think the real classic is a good old-fashioned 12 gauge, or even as Masad Ayub often recommends, is a 20 gauge, because a 20 gauge is a little lighter, a little easier to handle. I think the quote from him was, "If you're good with a 12 gauge, you'll be excellent with a 20 gauge." So, and there's really just not that much more power and impact with a 12 gauge, and whether if you're on the business end of a 12 gauge or 20 gauge, you're not standing there trying to measure up the end of the barrel size to figure out which one it is. You're not. The bad guy isn't. He's looking at it going, "That's a big damn hole pointed right at me."
Oh, yeah, and both of them have sufficient power to do what needs to be done in an emergency or that kind of a situation. So I think to the Masad Ayub point, it's kind of like they'll both do a significant amount of damage and more than they need to.
Oh, yeah. One of the things we can easily get hung up on is what kind of gun, what kind of ammo, and things like that. And I think those things are infinitely less important than getting proper instruction.
Oh, yeah. I think every expert on the planet would agree that it doesn't matter what firearm you have. If you have zero training, then your chances are significantly less than someone who has even a little bit of training.
Yeah, and there's some pretty low cost local training that you can go through. I know some of the best places are to if you're having a hard time finding a reputable instructor, hit a few gun stores and ask who they recommend. And if you hear the same name being mentioned over and over or multiple times, then that's probably a good person. Or there's always hitting Google and searching for people in your area, but get some kind of training. And remember, it's nice to be able to connect with whoever you're training to them feel comfortable going on and getting more training from this person. But you're not necessarily looking to make, a new best friend.
Something I've noticed is almost every locality. So if you do an internet search for a local area and guns, there will be a forum, or at least a sub forum focused on your area. And that's usually a good place to ask questions also. And it lets you get involved with the community.
Mm-hmm.
Just more people to talk to. It never hurts to talk to more people, and you'll figure out pretty quickly who to weed out as far as discussions you don't care about versus the ones that actually do make sense.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would stress when looking for any kind of defensive training is somebody that also teaches de-escalation techniques. If you can avoid a gunfight, or if you can avoid a fight of any kind, that's a much better day than in any of those situations. There's nothing to prove. And if you can get out of the situation without harming another individual or killing another individual or being harmed or injured in any way yourself, then that's a much better option. There's no need to be Rambo with these things. There's no need to be a mall ninja about it. It's and I think that's very important. Is really to that's one of the first questions I would ask of any kind of defensive instructor is, what kind of de-escalation techniques do you teach? And if they don't teach any, maybe they're a fantastic firearms instructor, but I would keep, maybe they're worth taking a class from, but I would keep looking, because I think that is somebody that doesn't teach that, their head's in the wrong place.
I don't remember whether it was you or me or one of our guests. Somebody said something on one of the shows that was really good, and it was something to the order of, it's not about taking the other person out or doing something to the other person or how big your gun is, or like you said, mall ninja or any of that stuff. It's really about survival, and it's about getting out of the situation alive and unharmed.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can do that without using a weapon, and you can do that purely with words, well, hell, more power to you.
Yeah. And who was it? I think it was either Dan or it was Robert that made a great statement, which is when it comes to firearms, you have to remember that every bullet has a lawyer attached to it.
Yeah, that was Dan actually.
Was it Dan?
Yeah, I think Dan mentioned that, and it was there was a cost, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it's been like $50,000.
Yeah, it's $50,000. You can attach a $50,000 price tag to every bullet, whether you're in the right or not, because as soon as you fire that,
justified or not.
yeah, you are immediately going to have at least a grand jury investigation, and you're going to have to hire an attorney to defend you. So that's yeah. But I think even on a more humane topic, it's as soon as weapons are pulled, then we've instantly taken a fight to a point that it doesn't necessarily need to go. Now that being said, that's not to say if anybody ever broke into my home in the middle of the night, I'm not asking questions. It's going to be a flashlight to confirm who's on the other end of my barrel, and then probably a bright flash. Because I'm sorry, if you break into my home in the middle of the night, my assumption is you mean to do me and mine harm.
Finishing that up, just to add to that real quickly, Texas has castle laws. Not every state does. A lot of them do. So know your local laws. That's, again, where training comes in. If you go for training, a lot of the times the instructors will explain to you your local laws. And that's critical. In Texas, if somebody came into your home and they're uninvited, I don't even think they have to come into your house anymore.
No.
So Texas has some pretty strong castle laws. That's what those are referred to. And the idea there is your home is your castle. I know a lot of you have probably heard the news lately about the woman there were two men trying to break into her home, and she was protecting her baby, and she ended up killing one of them, and the other one ended up getting arrested. Those were also castle laws that allowed her to justifiably do that. So just understand what your local laws are. Get yourself trained. You don't want to end up in a situation. Now, that being said, you always do what you have to do to defend yourself and your family. But understand what your local laws are and what the ramifications of doing those things are.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think now that we've talked about injuring people or becoming injured ourselves, we can move to kind of the final topic of medical. And I think medical, I've seen the silliest survival purchases made, and I'm including myself in that statement, when it comes to medical stuff. And there is an argument to be made for purchasing medical, we'll just a blanket statement of medical things that you don't necessarily know how to use, which is the assumption that somebody else within your group or somebody that might come along or somebody in your area might know how to use them, and you have those supplies available. However, if you're just starting off, I personally feel it's an unnecessary expense, and it's kind of very much a shot in the dark. I've seen a lot of people buy up suture kits. I think that's probably the easiest example. Suture kits are only good if you know how to use them, and if you understand that when and why to suture up. You can actually cause some real serious issues by suturing up wounds that should have been irrigated first. They can have junk in them. They need to be disinfected and disinfected properly. There's all kinds of issues surrounding that. But there's I've seen people buy all kinds of medical equipment and just stuff, and it's honestly the least of their concerns, when I think spending more of that time and energy on training, like we were just talking about, or ensuring their shelter is in proper order, or that they have enough food or water. But this isn't to say that a basic medical kit that meets your medical training level wouldn't be appropriate. I think that would be absolutely appropriate, and I think it's a necessity. Because how many times have we've all kind of hurt ourselves from time to time, and it's nice to at least have that first aid kit that you know how to use everything in there.
Right, but to put it bluntly, what we don't all need to have is a surgical kit in the house.
Unless you're a surgeon, or unless there's a surgeon in the home.
Right. If you have that kind of training and you know how to use the tools, do it. Otherwise, like Aaron said, your money is better spent elsewhere. And maybe the money is better spent in training. I mean, that's the way to look at it. If that's something you want to know how to use, well, surgical kit aside. I mean, but let's say a suturing kit or any other number of things. If those are things you want to know how to do, get yourself trained.
And I think that is a perfect time to bring in the idea of getting the training first before you buy gear. And I think this is, one of the fun things about survival, and one of the downfalls about survival and getting into the survival and getting excited about it, is we've talked about it all the time, is the tendency to buy gear and to try to buy our way out of a potential survival situation. And what I've learned, and I know Jonathan feels the same way about this, is that the best way to do any of these things is to, whether we're talking about firearms or medical stuff or anything, go get training first. At least go get basic instruction before you run out and buy anything. Excluding food or water, I don't think you need instruction on how to eat or how to drink. But
No, and by the way, we're talking from experience on this. Both of us have bought gear with and without training. And I will tell you, the gear we end up buying when we have training and have some stronger understanding of what it all means is so much better, and usually far more cost effective.
Oh, yeah.
Than the gear we buy when we're like, you know what we need?
And
whenever
usually
a conversation starts with, you know what we need, it doesn't go somewhere good.
Yeah, and it usually ends even badly if something of, oh, I know a guy is interjected in there somewhere. But,
exactly.
But the point is, go get your training first. And yeah, like Jonathan was just saying, we've learned this the hard way. And we've ended up learning that you will probably spend less money on gear or end up buying less gear if you go get the training first, because you actually understand what you need and you understand what your abilities are, and more importantly, what your abilities are not.
And the gear you get is usually better, believe it or not. That's the funniest part. You spend less money and you end up with a better product because you understand what it is. Instead of buying the flashy, cool thing, you buy the appropriate, actually better product.
Absolutely. And I think to kind of round out the show, because we've tried to aim this a lot at people that are new to prep, and we've mentioned training, but outside of firearms, and to bring in medical training as well. And this was a question I answered the other day, because somebody was emailing in and they were asking about training on a much broader, much more advanced topic that covered a whole lot of things. And the person had no training at all. And just starting, one of the complaints that we're talking about was how expensive some of this training is. And some of that survival training out there is really expensive. But it's not necessary to start with. And I think the place to begin are, things that we've talked about in the show before that we'll also link to in the show notes, which are things like CERT, which is a free program. Well, it's not really free. You've paid for it with your tax dollars, but that's just it. You've already paid for it with your tax dollars. You might as well take advantage of it. And CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team. We even had a representative some weeks ago come on the show and talk about it a little bit. And you learn all kinds of very useful, very, very interesting topics that have to do with survival, but it's survival from the standpoint of taking care of yourself, your family, and your community, and being more helpful of more help than hindrance in times of disaster. And you're not obligated after you've taken the course to actually become part of a local volunteer group. You won't necessarily be called up. So that's, if you have any hesitations about what I've just said, that hopefully that cleared it up. But it's a great way, and it's a very interesting class. And Jonathan and I went with was it 2 or 3 other friends to a class?
Yeah, we were there with 3 other friends.
Yeah, and we ended up having a great time, minus the fact that it was early on a Saturday morning, and that was. I
thought it was one of the better overall long-term training classes I've taken, and we talked about this before, but I recommend it to anyone who has CERT in their area. Take it. It is worth taking, if for nothing else than to understand what the role of your local emergency first responders is.
Yeah, that was one of the big eye-openers of the whole program is what are the different local groups, what are the different local agencies, what are the state and national agencies, and how do they interact and how do they respond to disasters? So going on beyond that, Red Cross. I mean, who hasn't heard of Red Cross? and about about a year ago or 2 years ago, actually, Jason McCall and I went and took all kinds of God, I can't talk today. Jason McCall and I went and took all kinds of Red Cross classes together, and it's probably about time to re-up all of that stuff. But it was very inexpensive, and it was great stuff. It was all very practical, and I think the interesting thing is I've had some people ask, well, which one do I take first, CERT or Red Cross? It doesn't matter. What you will notice is that the medical aspects of CERT versus Red Cross are very different mindsets, because one, Red Cross does not deal with the mentality or issue of that there is a major disaster that has happened. So the medical training they're giving you there and how to respond is very different from the way you respond in CERT, which is under the assumption that something really bad has happened and major has happened.
Right.
Going beyond,
I think the Red Cross gives you more of the practical day to day.
Oh yeah.
And the things you'll run into a lot more often. CERT, you can almost think of it as the Red Cross is the everyday prepper in you, and CERT is those big, huge things that you fear and hope never happen.
Yeah. And I think the Red Cross in some areas is more accessible than CERT. I know CERT programs aren't spread completely throughout the country, but you'd be pretty hard pressed not to be able to find a Red Cross set of courses nearby.
Yeah.
For firearms training, I'm a little biased, and John, I know you are too.
I'm a lot biased.
But for Project Appleseed, which is probably the finest, if not, no, it is the finest basic rifle marksmanship training with a little history lesson thrown in.
You'll probably still want some form of handgun training, but Appleseed is a great start. And the nice part is it's children friendly, teenage friendly, adult friendly. Doesn't matter who you are, it's friendly.
And it doesn't matter what political persuasion you're of, religious persuasion, right. None of that. It's not what Project Appleseed is about, but it is a wonderful experience, and you will learn the fundamentals of firing any weapon. Specifically, you'll learn about rifles, but all of those skills can be translated to any kind of weapon, and it's very inexpensive.
Right.
Going, outside of that, some other low-cost ways are to volunteer. Volunteer for your local fire department. A lot of police departments have volunteer programs you can get involved in. There's all kinds of local volunteer programs. And the nice thing about volunteer programs is they're going to have to teach you how to do whatever it is they need you to do. So you will get training. Now, you are going to have to reciprocate that by obviously volunteering your time, but it's a great way to get free training from your local government or even your federal government.
Yeah, now you pay the taxes, might as well get the training.
Exactly. And so just to kind of wrap up today, we want to remind everybody that it's a new year, and it's time, if you haven't been, to really get out there. The time is now. The time is now to respond and act upon and ensure that those things in your life that could threaten your life or your family's life or your neighborhood, that you're ready to at least respond in the most basic of ways to those disasters. With that, we wish everybody a happy new year, and we're going to wrap up for today. Next week, remember, the 1-year anniversary show. Don't miss it. If you liked the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. And if you didn't, well, why not tell us about it using the contact form on the site? Seriously, the show's for you, the listener, and if you have something to say, we're listening. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you'll receive updates about the site, notifications of new articles, and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each episode where we invite you to comment on the show, interact with us, interact with each other, and let the world know what you're thinking. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.